What is going on with the housing market? That is the question I get probably 3 or 4 times a day. And it's usually not much more specific than that. It's usually just, Mike, what is going on here? I'm Mike. This is Mondays with Mike. We're going to come back to this topic again today. And we'll just come back to it as long as it's relevant. I mean, we're always tracking what's going on in the market, but the story for a very long time was interest rates are low, inventory is low, and housing prices are going up, right? We all got very used to that narrative. Now with interest rate hikes, among other things, inflation and some other big changes that we've seen in the market since the pandemic hit and the response to the pandemic have really made the narrative a moving target. So we're trying to keep up. We're trying to figure out, what's going to happen, knowing that, we can't predict the future, so we just have to be prepared. KPMG this week came out with a projection for 2023. They think that nationally, we're going to lose 15% in the value of single family homes. I mean, there's a mix of other types of housing, but that's going to be the focus. That's the majority of the owned housing stock that's in the U.S. The other big thing that we follow and a lot of economists follow is the Case-Shiller index, which has a lot of real estate data. There was a record slowdown in August. There was a 2.6 percentage point decline month over month. It's the biggest drop in the index's 35-year history. And I am reading the screen because I want to make sure I get these numbers right. So nationally, we're starting to see, cracks in the floor of pricing. What about Long Island, right? So Long Island, we've talked about this many, many times on this series. It's sort of a different creature because we have limited space, limited inventory. It's a suburb of New York City, which is, this is the biggest metro area, or one of the biggest metro areas in the country, if not the world. So there are certain things about this area that, up to this point at least, have kept housing and the numbers pretty strong. So according to Miller Samuel, and this is probably the most highly regarded appraisal firm, definitely in New York, we've actually had Jonathan Miller on our law firm's podcast. Really great guy, highly respected. So when he speaks or when his firm has an opinion, we tend to listen and follow. We'll get back to some of his thoughts and his firm's thoughts on where things are going and why they've shaken out the way they have on Long Island. But first, just some statistics that they reported. So the median sale price of homes on Long Island in the third quarter, so remember we're talking about July, August, September, they hit a record of 620,000 during that quarter. It was a 2.5% increase quarter over quarter, and it was a 6% rise year over year if we compare the quarters. All right, so that if you just look at that data alone, it looks like, hey, things are still going up and they're going to continue to go up on Long Island. We also had an average of 41 days on the market on Long Island, which means, by the time the lawyers get involved and do a contract, you're figuring like 2 to 3 weeks of actual marketing time before you have a deal that's made and before it's going to contract. So what's the cause of this when rates have been going up? It's pretty clear, and Jonathan Miller and his firm have, they've supported this with their evidence and their studies. It's just inventory, right? You don't even need a study to know that, but if you really dig deep and you compare the data to other parts of the country, we just don't have as much inventory. The final day of the third quarter, there were 6,241 homes on Long Island that were listed. That's still 20,000 fewer than there were in 2008 when, that was our last crash that everybody wants to try to compare this one to. There are a lot of differences between 2008 and now. The big one, of course, is that in 2008, it was caused by lax lending standards and over leveraging. People were borrowing too much relative to the value of the homes they were buying. And that caused an actual crash in the whole economy, as many people will remember. This time is different, right? This is caused by, we have inventory shortages caused by the pandemic, which was unprecedented. We have now not unprecedented inflation, but certainly in my lifetime, unprecedented inflation. And we have, Federal Reserve that is really, I'll just say it, hell-bent on getting that inflation under control. and using their interest rate power, the raising of interest rates to get it under control. So that's having a big impact. But in a place like Long Island, coming off the pandemic, where houses were just flying off the shelf, and we were spending most of 21 and the early part of this year looking for the next listing. Well, we still have that situation now, and it's keeping prices at least at a plateau, and they haven't started to decline on Long Island. So before we get too excited that Long Island's the exception and that at worst it's going to plateau, you have to remember we're really looking at summer numbers, right? July, August, September, that was the third quarter that we've had time to study and take a look at. Those are deals that were made in late spring and early summer. And it wasn't really until like May, June, July that people started to see just how much rates were climbing. And so we have to really take that into account. I don't think the Fed is going to let up on raising rates. Maybe they'll do it a little slower. They won't have it push up as much per month, and they don't directly affect it, but it has a big impact on mortgage rates, what they do. Jonathan Miller, will come back to him. He pointed out that it's usually 12 to 24 months before you really start to see housing prices factor in something like higher interest rates or a necessary correction. And that's psychological more than anything. You have sellers who, in some cases, don't want to move out of a house where they have a 3% mortgage and they're going to have to move someplace with a 7% mortgage or a mid-6 mortgage. You also have some sellers who, even if the payments still make sense, they just don't want to sell when they're not getting what they perceive to be the best price. So there's a big psychological component to a market shifting into a buyer market and price declines, becoming evident, especially on a place like Long Island. You do have a lot of affluent people who have access to funds, and maybe you're just waiting for a dip in rates to jump back in and form a line again. So where do we come out on this? Because I don't want to go too long without really saying anything other than just regurgitating what I'm reading and hearing. I think that we will start to see some price declines. I think we already are seeing some price declines on Long Island. I don't think it's going to be pronounced as in other parts of the country, but that's not new. That's very typical of this area. It's a more stable area pricing-wise. And buyers, if you're looking to buy now, you have to just get more creative. There are loan programs that can help you keep your rate down or your payment down, I should say, in the first couple of years. And you may have to get a little bit more creative in finding inventory, and that's where a good realtor or broker can come in. All right, so hopefully you get some good facts and information out of this. If you want to talk real estate, where the market's going directly, if you see this on social media, please DM me. If you're getting this by email, reply by email. You probably have my number, as I always say, and I'll keep you posted. Hope everybody's doing well as we head into the holidays.